everyone. This is Caitlin Snyder from the National Housing Conference. Thank you so much for joining today's Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force meeting. We're just going to get started in about 2 minutes. I can see lots of folks are still dialing in, so we'll get started right around 2. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Caitlin Snyder. I am a Policy and Research Associate here at the National Housing Conference, and we have a really great presentation for you today from the folks over at Center for Community Progress and the WILKINSBURG Community Development Corporation. Before I turn it over to our presenters, I wanted to walk through just a couple of federal policy updates to make sure everyone is aware of those. So the first I want to start with is around appropriations. Last week, Congress and President Trump approved a spending package which funds 5 of the 12 appropriations subcommittees for all of fiscal year 2019. And that same spending package also funds the rest of the government, which includes HUD, through a continuing resolution through December 7th of this year. So around December 7th, after the elections and before December 7th, we'll probably see Congress working to either advance the spending bills or to have another CR that gets you through September 30th of next year. But I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar and let you know that the House canceled its October sessions. So it was supposed to be in this week and next week in DC to work, but they have canceled those sessions. So they're actually on recess until after the election. The next thing I want to move to is around FHFA. Today, they released a request for comment on 4 of the 22 modifications that Fannie Mae is proposing on its duty to serve plan. So as context here, Freddie Mac also submitted some modifications to its duty to serve plan, but FHFA decided that they were technical and didn't require public comment. So for 4 of the 22 that Fannie Mae proposed, they're requesting public comment. And I'll run through them very quickly. The first one modifies the baseline and targets for purchase or rehabilitation of certain distressed properties due to market conditions changing from when they initially made these plans. And so this one falls under the preservation bucket in duty to serve. The second one modifies the chattel loan pilot to include options such as anticipating debt structure or guaranteeing a security containing chattel loans. And so that one is a part of the manufactured housing bucket in duty to serve. These next 2 are under the kind of rural bucket. The first one is around modifying actions to reflect revised rural low-income housing tax credit investments targets based on enhanced market insight and experience since re-entering the LIHTC market. So Fannie and Freddie are newly in, or I should say, newly in the LIHTC market again. And so this 4th one is they're proposing to add a new objective, and that's around understanding more about small financial institutions in rural areas. So this just came out today. NHC is working through Fannie Mae's proposal, and we're deciding if we're going to comment, and if we do, what that comment will look like. So I just wanted to put it on people's radar because this group was especially engaged around the duty to serve plans. Comments are due November 2nd, so you've got a little bit of time. And then the final update that I wanted to share with folks is around our solutions for affordable housing convening. It's just a few weeks away on November 27th and 28th. Our national housing policy convening will explore key federal housing policy issues like housing finance reform, opportunity zones, filling the affordable housing gap, fair housing, and modernization of the Community Reinvestment Act. This year at Solutions, we're also going to have our first advocacy day. So we're really excited about that and giving folks the opportunity to make the case for the policies that you would like to see implemented in your communities. Right now, we're offering our discounted early bird rate, and that's through October 26th, and then the price will increase by $50. So I just wanted to flag this for people to register before that October 26th deadline. And then the last thing before I hand it over to our speakers is if at any point you have questions or technical issues through GoToWebinar, we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so you can submit them at any time through your GoToWebinar module in this box that I've highlighted in red. And then if you have any issues, please use this link, support.citrixonline.com. And the final thing I'll say is that we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available to all attendees after the webinar. And so with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Danielle Lewinsky is the Director of Michigan Initiatives at the Center for Community Progress and author of the Creative Placemaking on Vacant Properties, Lessons Learned from 4 Cities report. For anyone who hasn't already had the chance to read the report, I highly recommend it, and it's available for download in your GoToWebinar module. And then our second panelist is Tracy Evans, and she's the Executive Director of the WILKINSBURG Community Development Corporation in Pennsylvania. And WILKINSBURG, Pennsylvania, and the great work of their Community Development Corporation was one of the cities profiled in the report. So with that, I'm excited to welcome both of our fabulous presenters, and I will hand it over to Danielle.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Good afternoon, everyone. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm Danielle Lewinsky, Vice President and Director of Michigan Initiatives here at Community Progress. And really what I was hoping for today's webinar is to give you an introductory overview of creative placemaking and vacant properties. I was thinking first I'll provide an overview of creative placemaking generally for those of you that may be new to the term and to the practice. Then I'll talk about how creative placemaking can play a role in the revitalization of vacant properties and discuss some key lessons learned from communities that are actively incorporating creative placemaking into their vacant property initiatives. And then I'm going to pass it along to Tracy Evans to share more about her experiences in WILKINSBURG, Pennsylvania. Okay, before I dive into the content, I wanted to provide a brief overview of our organization for those of you that may be new to the Center for Community Progress. So we're a national nonprofit, and we're the leading resource for urban, suburban, and rural communities that are trying to address systemic property vacancy and also property deterioration. We deliver technical assistance, education, and policy work. And that work is really aimed at helping to foster strong and equitable communities where vacant and abandoned and deteriorated properties really transformed into assets for neighbors and neighborhoods. Just to give you a sense of sort of our reach, in 2016, we fielded over 200 technical assistance inquiries. We supported policy or programmatic change in dozens of communities, and we've reached well over 5,000 through our education work. Creative placemaking is a practice that engages many different fields, and Community Progress approaches the practice through the lens of vacant property reclamation. We've been exploring, really alongside communities across the U.S., whether the practice of creative placemaking can play a role in revitalizing specifically vacant properties. And before we discuss this further, I want to pause and provide a definition of creative placemaking for those of you that may not be familiar with the term. So in its seminal white paper on the practice, which was commissioned by the National Endowment for the Arts, Metris Arts defines creative placemaking generally as a process where partners from multiple sectors strategically shape the physical and also the social character of a neighborhood, town, or city or region, really around arts and cultural activities. Creative placemaking, it tries to animate both public and private spaces. It rejuvenates structures and streetscapes, improves local business viability and public safety. It really tries to bring a diverse range of people together to celebrate and be inspired. So what this looks like is sort of in practice can take varying forms, and I'll back up for a moment. And I'm sorry, I'm noticing there's I think I had a font issue uploading this, so if anything looks off, I'd refer you to the PDF version that I know is downloadable through the webinar. But what looks, in terms of creative placemaking, what that looks like can take various forms, really from temporary, more visual installations to performances, all the way through to bricks and mortar spaces. And in creative placemaking, local artists work with residents to create artworks that enhance their neighborhood and also try to encapsulate their shared experiences. So, for example, a neighborhood art center might provide after-school lessons and apprenticeships So neighborhood children in low-income areas have a safe place to hang out and also to learn marketable skills. Or a neighborhood association might start an art walk or a cultural festival that draws new visitors to the small business corridor. A municipal government, for example, they could work with a neighborhood to designate an arts district and provide incentives, infrastructure, and also safety upgrades to try and turn it into a destination while really improving quality of life for the current residents. In creative placemaking in general, it's very wide-ranging, but it doesn't encompass any and all creative activities. So as an example, if a neighborhood resident paints a mural or hosts a concert, that one-off artistic expression may be a success. It may provide really a great moment for individuals to engage with the arts, but those efforts may not in and of themselves create a sense of place. There really are three essential elements that help to distinguish creative placemaking from other really more diffuse creative activities that may happen in a community. Creative placemaking, first, it's specifically place-based, as the name indicates. Creative placemaking practitioners try to root their work in a specific place. So a concert hall, for example, that may serve a whole city could act as a cultural boom for that city, but unless the owners or the leaders of the concert hall collaborate with community members to achieve a specific community development objective, it really does not rise to the level of creative placemaking. Creative placemaking really tries to ask, how can arts and cultural-based strategies help achieve community priorities, whether those are physical or social or economic? In creative placemaking, it must also be really a community-centered process. Effective creative placemaking is centered not just on that specific place, but really around the people who live, work, and play there. It's not just about the buildings, it's really about the people who experience the place. They must be really not just at the forefront of the work, but engage continuously throughout the process. And this is really imperative because practitioners that approach the work with just a singular focus, trying to maximize real estate value, those efforts could drive physical or cultural displacement. So keeping people really at the center of the process ensures that the art and creative placemaking is done with and not to the community. Then finally, creative placemaking, it's not a silver bullet. It alone is not going to reverse decades of decline. Rather, it's really one tool that practitioners can use in concert with other tools as a part of an approach that includes housing preservation or development, economic development, and resident survey programs. And when applied to vacancy in particular, creative placemaking can serve as a valuable approach alongside some of our more traditional strategies, things like code enforcement, demolition, and resale. So those are some of the essential elements really briefly of creative placemaking. Now, how can creative placemaking impact communities struggling with entrenched vacancy and property deterioration? There hasn't been a study focused on measuring creative placemaking's impact specifically on vacant properties, but there have been studies measuring the impact of creative placemaking on related economic development, housing, and then also community goals. And very briefly, up on the screen are a couple of high-level impacts, and I encourage you to visit the studies that are cited here to dig in a little bit more deeply. But on the economic side, creative placemaking has been shown to invigorate markets and provide income opportunities for residents. On the housing side, it's been shown to make connections between residents and also to help stabilize vulnerable communities. And on the social and cultural side, it creates opportunities for residents to express themselves, share language and culture, and engage in decisions that affect them. Specific to vacant properties, we hypothesize that when a community that has struggled with vacancy integrates arts and culture into its revitalization work, engaging in a community-centered process of creative placemaking, that can lead to the cultivation of a distinct sense of place, which people have an emotional and authentic connection to. And that strong connection can compel residents and businesses to remain invested in their community and also to help attract new residents and businesses to become invested. And that retention and attraction, really combined with other vacant property strategies, can help reduce vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. And that hypothesis, or sort of our theory of change, is predicated on the premise that for communities that are facing entrenched vacancy, it's not just about simply occupying a vacant property, that in order to create catalytic and lasting change, the process really of how a property comes to be occupied matters. And also that who or what occupies a property, that also matters. In the process of creative placemaking, it aims to really address both of these in a community-centered, in a strategic way. So over the course of the past couple of years, Community Progress has reached out to other communities engaging in creative placemaking on vacant properties, with our goal to learn more about their objectives, impacts of their efforts, challenges they face, and then also lessons learned. And this year, we engaged more deeply with 4 cities, one of which is joining us on the call today, where arts and culture are really a part of the conversation around vacant properties. In addition to Wilkinsburg, those cities were also Kalamazoo, Michigan, Macon, Georgia, and Newburgh, New York. And based on the exchanges with these cities and some of our previous work over the past few years, we collaborated with entitled Creative Placemaking on Vacant Properties. And our report tries to summarize some of what is working well and what challenges remain related to vacant properties and creative placemaking. And our hope is that the report and our findings can help inform some of the burgeoning efforts we're seeing in communities across the U.S. Today, I'm going to summarize some of the key content from the report, but I really encourage you to visit the publications page on our website. Website's up here to download the report for free, and I think it's also included in some of the materials for the webinar today. You'll be able to dig in much more deeply with the case studies from these 4 cities. And while we have limited time today, I did want to very briefly highlight a few of the initiatives from the cities we've worked with more closely this year. I want to start first in Kalamazoo, Michigan. For those of you that don't know Kalamazoo, it's a city of about 75,000 in southwest Michigan, more or less about halfway between Chicago and Detroit. So until about 2005, the Washington Square commercial corridor of the Edison neighborhood in Kalamazoo, it had a high concentration of adult businesses. It was a hub for prostitution too. A lot of undesirable activities happening within this key commercial core. And the Kalamazoo County Land Bank had acquired several vacant properties in this commercial node and began working with the Edison Neighborhood Association to try and find tenants for those properties. And while the land bank had envisioned revitalization and reactivation of this commercial area, it faced a big challenge in getting businesses, but then also potential customers to come to Edison, since fear and some of those negative perceptions of the area continued to keep people away. So the land bank used an existing asset. They had monthly art hops to temporarily activate some of these vacant spaces in Washington Square. And the success of those art hops even attracted art-based businesses to locate in those buildings in Washington Square. For example, there's a guitar shop, a belly dance studio, and the land bank also hosted Fair Games, which was a contest in which local food businesses vied to win occupancy of a built-out storefront, in addition to other services like legal and accounting and marketing help and restaurant supplies. Fair Games participants, they could also attend a course on developing a business, as well as other mentoring opportunities. And the community and residents also participated in selecting the businesses, or the business rather, to go into that space. One of the ways they did this was having competitors serve bite-sized portions of their food to art hop attendees, who then were able to rank and give feedback on their food. And the winner of that competition, which was Spa on the Block, had a graduated rent schedule from the land bank for the first 2 years, starting with reduced rents for the first 3 and working up to market rate. So in addition to the art hop and subsequent new businesses, the land bank also partnered to generate the We Are Edison project, which you can see on the lower right-hand side of the screen. The We Are Edison project, which was based, as some of you may have heard of it, on a global art project called Inside Out. It showcases the neighborhood via portraiture. So portraits of over 100 residents are displayed in large format on a vacant commercial property along this same corridor. And that project, along with other creative placemaking, reuses, and events in the area, have really bolstered and attracted businesses to the vacant space and also attracted new development. Newburgh, which is about 60 miles north of New York City, has around 30,000 residents or so. And vacancy has decreased in the past couple of years in the city, but there's still around 650 vacant properties, and most of those vacant properties are in poor condition. Uniquely in Newburgh, the land bank there has a formalized what they call an artist in vacancy program. And that program engages interdisciplinary artists to create artwork on vacant properties that the land bank owns. The artist in vacancy work, it really aims to try and temporarily activate a space, but more broadly, the aim for that program is to shift the mindset that vacant properties are not approachable, that they carry some negative stigma and should be avoided. And so the artist in vacancy program, it helps to produce temporary installations. Some of these include visual performance pieces, and I've highlighted on the left-hand side of the screen a couple of examples, starting first with Charger, which was a site-specific performance, which engaged the local high school track team on a vacant lot. So they took sort of starting block positions within a field of sprinklers in a performance piece. And then another project, Beyond Utility, was an installation that juxtaposed some of the original architectural elements against a new historic home owned by against new pieces. These were displayed in a historic home that the land bank owns. And it was featured as a stop on the city's Open Studios tour and really offered participants an opportunity to engage with that neighborhood and the building in a very positive way. One other Newburgh community champion I wanted to highlight is Safe Harbors of the Hudson, which really embraced a combination of both some of those temporary and more permanent creative placemaking projects. So with the help of a landscape architect, engineer, and the city's planning department, Safe Harbors transformed a really critical vacant lot. It was adjacent to their building. It was at a critical point on the commercial thoroughfare into an ADA accessible park. It has native plantings, solar lighting, a stormwater garden, and pieces of art, including some large photos, which you can see in the image on the upper right-hand side, along with a mural. And the park is programmed with the community in mind. It offers a wide range of events like salsa dancing, double dutch, poetry, and trapeze classes. And in the future, the park is going to serve as the neighborhood entrance to a restored community theater. Finally, onto Macon, which for those of you that don't know, Macon operates under a joint city-county government. And while the downtown in Macon is well on its sort of way to reoccupancy and recovery, many of the neighborhoods in Macon are still struggling with severe vacancy. Macon Bib has around a 50% or so residential vacancy rate. And the Mill Hill neighborhood suffers from particularly high vacancy, but the Macon Arts Alliance, along with the Macon Bib Urban Development Authority, they're working right now on an arts-infused revitalization of that neighborhood. And some of the project partners there focused on community engagement, really, in the planning process for the East Macon's Arts Village. And they engaged a team of residents, which they dubbed the roving listeners, to speak with current residents about their neighborhood and try to identify local artists and local talent already within the neighborhood. And additionally, as part of the planning process, one thing that was interesting is the team threw community block parties. So music, food, art making, and those parties serve to bring people together creatively and collect information and build out the cultural plan. So those were their engagement activities for the planning process. The sort of centerpiece, if you will, for the art-based revitalization in Mill Hill is really the rehab, the revitalization of some of the existing vacant houses. So you can see those on the bottom side of the screen. These are being transformed into live workspaces for artists. The other cornerstone is the renovation of a dilapidated auditorium. This is situated somewhat sort of in the middle of the neighborhood. And it's been transformed into the new Community Arts Center, which is a focal point for the neighborhood. And adjacent to this, vacant lots are going to be turned into a linear park, which will span 4 neighborhood blocks and include a soccer field. And all of these components together, the live work spaces for the artists, the art center, the park, it's helping to form the arts village and provide opportunities for residents and visitors to come together in Mill Hill. I've only briefly touched on some of the placemaking projects in these cities, and you'll hear more from Wilkinsburg in a moment. During these conversations that we've had over the past couple of years, we've had the opportunity to hear some common themes and also challenges from cities trying to apply creative placemaking specifically on vacant properties. And these key takeaways and lessons focused on a couple of topics, things like regulatory issues, developing partnerships, maintaining and building momentum, community engagement, and funding. I'm not going to have time to go into all of these. I really just wanted to touch very briefly on regulatory issues for a moment. So working with vacant properties can present some pretty unique challenges compared to doing creative placemaking on other types of properties. These difficulties include things like getting site control because of muddied ownership and liens, safety issues, liability issues, repair costs, and the traditional city systems and policies that impact vacant properties in their reuse, things that you guys are familiar with, like municipal property disposition, property and tax and mortgage foreclosure, code enforcement, zoning issues. All of these can be antiquated at times, unclear, and difficult to work with. And even if the city has been pretty proactive about modernizing some of those vacant property systems, because creative placemaking projects somewhat by nature introduce a new or novel approach to the reuse of space, these can really run up against a lot of difficulties just generally with respect to local regulations. But even beyond that, some other issues like site control, getting certificates of occupancy, dealing with fire suppression, insurance coverage. These are particularly challenging barriers for vacant properties because of the high cost and really dilapidated nature of the land or the structure that you're working with. So in some instances, a group may be trying to use a temporary creative event as an opportunity to raise funding or raise awareness for funding so that they can ultimately rehab the property. But they find when they're working with local officials, they can't host that temporary event without the structure being fully rehabilitated first, which is, of course, what they're trying to raise funding for. And that local regulation, it's really necessary to preserve, health, safety, welfare, but the design and application of these regulations really should be able to accommodate some of that necessary revitalization work of creative placemaking. And what we found is when city government and practitioners implement strategies and tactics to try and build relationships and increase communication between the artist practitioner and the city officials, many of the regulatory barriers can be overcome. Really briefly, in terms of some strategies, on the practitioner's end, really the first step includes simply finding and understanding the relevant local regulations, and practitioners can encounter really great difficulty just trying to identify what they need to do to access and work on these vacant properties. So minimally, a city or local jurisdiction could ensure that the process and requirements for things like vacant property acquisition and also permitting are prominently displayed and easy to access on their website. But even for an artist or volunteer, they may not be familiar with construction codes or permitting, and simply having it on the website for some may not provide enough clarity, since some ordinances can be a bit difficult to decipher. So a city could also consider providing an easy reference guide for common issues and questions related to vacant property reuse and permitting. Further, if a city wants to cultivate more creative placemaking activities, city officials could consider proactively meeting with some of the arts and cultural organizations to help build awareness of city regulations, but also minimally just to establish a clear point of contact for some of those local partners and begin building some of those relationships. Another strategy that's been helpful in addressing some regulatory issues is to identify and cultivate really liaisons, more or less, to help move some of these creative placemaking projects more readily. So this can be an individual either inside or outside of city government. We've seen it both ways applied locally. And the idea is that this individual would understand both the artist practitioner side, but then also the government and regulatory side. For example, and Tracy may touch on this, but the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council created an Office of Public Arts. And the director helps serve informally as a liaison between the city there and artists. And really what she does is she's able to leverage some of her deep knowledge of city processes and help artists better plan for and also budget for the permitting process and assist in making introduction with the right planning department officials, and also helps to troubleshoot when issues may emerge. Liaisons we've seen can be particularly helpful when city departments are understaffed or lack some of the capacity to move some of the smaller scale projects or help with first-time developers or creative placemaking practitioners. You know, beyond those tactics to increase clarity and communication about regulation, in terms of changes to actual policy, we've not been able to identify a singular sort of one-size-fits-all policy change that would better enable creative placemaking on vacant properties. By nature of both the project, but then also the properties, each initiative is somewhat unique, such that what may work in one city may not work within another city, but then also sometimes even within a city, the application and some of the risk analysis will vary based on the features of the project or the features of the property. So what could be helpful is for municipalities to also look at how some of their regulations can adopt a bit more flexibility. So for example, in Macon, they're working on a pink zone in the Mill Hill neighborhood. And this would be an overlay district within that specific area to allow residents to have retail at their home with commercial access and light manufacturing. Things like selling baked goods in their own homes. So that potential overlay, it's not a complete overhaul of existing commercial and residential zoning, but it helps to tweak and create some degree of flexibility within existing codes specific to achieving those creative objectives in that area. I'm going to go ahead and stop there and throw it over to Tracy. Again, I would encourage everyone to take a look at the publication where we go a little bit more in depth into the regulatory issues, but then also touch on some of those other lessons learned, things like creating partnerships and also funding. So with that, Tracy, do you want to take it from there to talk about Wilkinsburg?
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Evans. I'm the Executive Director of the Wilkinsburg Community Development Corporation. Wilkinsburg is an independent borough located just east to the city of Pittsburgh. Wilkinsburg was once one of the most wealthy communities in Allegheny County and had a population of 35,000 in the 1950s. Like most of the region, Wilkinsburg declined during the collapse of the steel industry in the 1970s and has seen many vacancies, the traditional business district vacancy, that type of thing that most communities in the Northeast saw. Let's see. Oops, went too far. Okay. Sorry. Get back to the slide here. So the Wilkinsburg CDC was formed by residents. We were founded as through a focus group that was the whole community looking at how we were going to revitalize our borough. And the CDC was really tasked with typical Main Street activities, working to revitalize our business district. And in 2010, we were able to hire staff, start to grow. Let's see here. Sorry. There we go. Let me go back a few slides. I got off here. Okay, there's Pittsburgh. Yeah. So as I said, we've been focusing on business district revitalization. We work with some educational programs, green, clean, and safe, working to change the perception of the community. We've been designated with Main Street designation, both state and national, and have really worked with a lot of new businesses coming in to help fill vacant storefronts and help fill buildings that have been vacant altogether. But one of the things that's been compelling and a constant were people interested in trying to acquire vacant property, trying to figure out how to finance vacant property, and really how to reduce blight overall in the community. So let's see here. We came up with the concept of the Vacant House Tour, which has been a great success in the fall of 2014. We were working with a student group from Carnegie Mellon University. It was a combination of undergrads and graduate program students, both from the School of Architecture, from the Heinz School of Business, a couple other groups. I think some graphic artists were involved. And they came out to Wilkinsburg and met with the community to talk about vacancy and get to know the neighbors. And at the same time, let's see this slide, there had been a project that we had worked on with the owner. It's the House of Gold is what the project was called. And we had an artist, a sculpture artist, who had acquired an old fire hall in Wilkinsburg, and she wanted to acquire vacant property around her, and we helped her walk through the process and how you can acquire vacant property in Allegheny County. And there was this house that was on the property, and she was planning to tear it down, and through the process did it was a fundraiser, I can't remember which one she used, but like a Kickstarter, where she painted the house gold and was able to raise money to tear that house down. And that was something that really inspired the students from CMU. So again, they wanted to learn more about vacant property, the ways people could acquire property, and what the neighbors thought. And again, engagement was really what came out of this in a way that we really enjoyed. We've done a lot of different art projects and a lot of community festivals, murals, all sorts of things. But in this process, it was unique because it was created so much by the community. So what happened in the process was that we had a number of public meetings, and I'll go back to that slide, where the residents really talked about what they wanted to see. We had maps on tables, circled neighborhoods that we thought were really target neighborhoods for reinvestment, and asked the residents to talk about which properties they thought were interesting. Let's see here. There you go. You can see. So this is kind of looking at the maps, looking at some of the ideas they had. And the group really worked with the residents to pick houses for the tours and go and research them, go and find out who lived there, which ones were interesting, what the stories were they had to tell. We have over 800 vacant properties in Wilkinsburg, but in each tour we picked 5. We picked 5 homes and asked the residents to be the docents or the tour guides who not only learned about the house, but then served on the day of the tour. And so we had this kind of signage that was created for the houses, talking about their histories, showing photos of who lived there, what it looked like. Okay, so here's some pictures of the tour. And just to go back a little bit to some of the partners we worked with or the resources we used, we were working with the county, we were working with the real estate, the city of Pittsburgh, Google, Facebook, lots of historical tests from the Wilkinsburg Library and the Historical Society. We also used social media very, very well on this process. And through Facebook and Twitter, we were able to find previous owners, find more stories, and find information about the tour. In the first tour, we were able to engage over 30,000 people in 2015, and then we repeated the tour in 2016 and engaged 80,000 people. So anyway, going back, the tour guides really put all this story together and made timelines of the houses and really created the tour. On the day of the tour, let's see, attendance, both tours had about 600 each year, so we had over 1,200 people attend. You can see some photos of different pictures of the houses and the tour guides. That's the Wilkinsburg train station, and this is This is one of our signature projects. It's a historic, over 100-year-old now train station that's been vacant for over 50 years. The WCDC started a capital campaign in 2016 to raise funds to restore the building. We're at about $6 million, and we've raised 5.2 at this point. So we're well into the renovations, replacing the roof and all the exterior repairs. And so that was featured on the tour as well. And we're looking forward to it being completed. Here you can see some of the construction taking place. Another part of the tour, and really what drove the whole conversation for us, is information and resources. So we did a workshop both times. Both workshops had about 75 participants, where we explained the different ways that people could acquire vacant property, there's multiple ways to do that. It's complex. And then also finance vacant property rehabs, which is quite complicated as well. We've worked with some great partners here in Wilkinsburg, which include Allegheny County, several banks that have created purchase rehab products that can be used to restore vacant property. West Banco is one, Prime Lenders is another that's worked with us quite a bit. And then also people who can help with housing counseling in terms of credit preparedness if you need help with that, and how to get construction costs. So we've worked with groups that help people identify when they take on a vacant property what it's really going to cost. Okay, so in 2012, there was an inventory done of Wilkinsburg, and like I said, we have over 800 vacant properties. Since 2012, we know that 41 vacant properties have been acquired through different ways here in Wilkinsburg. 14 of those are affordable housing developments. We've had people acquire properties beside them to use as side lots, green space, parking. We've had 3 properties restored into residential homes, and 1 commercial development that's been completed since 2012. And just some feedback here. I'm trying to read this, but I can't see all of it. We did do a lot of follow-up on the tours and made sure that we got surveys and responses. And one of the kinds of things that was really a great win is that a couple that was on the tour, the first year we did it, were contemplating buying a vacant property, but they really weren't sure if they were comfortable with the idea. And so by going through the tour and getting to meet the residents and the people who are out on the streets, giving the information, and just walking around in general and talking, they felt really comfortable. And so they did move forward and buy that house. And then we featured it on a house and garden tour the next year. And then in 2016, one of the houses that was on the tour was acquired through the vacant property and is now being renovated for residential use. So this is how we won an award from the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group for the project. We also were featured, I know, in several architectural conferences, one as far away as Brazil. So we got a lot of wonderful press about the community, but really I think the biggest piece was just getting people engaged in the story and helping to tell the story. Let's see. So yeah, because we had such success, we were able to hire a full-time vacant property coordinator to work on vacant property housing workshops, helping people acquire vacant property. And we also continue to work with a lot of the artists who are involved in other projects that we talked about with Community Progress, and people who came on the tour with us to work on how to continue to come up with creative ways. So it really is, you know, the idea of getting people engaged, but telling the story and feeling comfortable about communities where they might not have felt comfortable before. So thank you, and I'll give it back to Danielle or Caitlin, I'm not sure which.
Thank you so much. This is Caitlin. So at this point, we're going to take questions. We've had a few come in, but I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I thought that was a really great presentation. So our first question not sure exactly if this should be Danielle or Tracy, so you two can decide. In addition to tax delinquent properties, how and where have the various partners gotten ownership or site control of vacant and abandoned properties?
I can share.
I want to address that. Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Danielle?
No. I was going to say, if you can share a little bit your experience in Wilkinsburg.
I can talk about what we do, yes. So, you know, Wilkinsburg is a county. It's not inside a city. So we do have one program in Allegheny County that helps people acquire vacant property. It's called the Vacant Property Recovery Program, and it's essentially a eminent domain. People can apply through a process with the county. The county reviews to see their plans, make sure they're not in collusion or don't have a lot of code violations, those kind of things. So it's a good fit, and they really understand what they're taking on. Then it goes through the Borough Council, Borough Planning Commission, and those types of things. And that's a great program because it really does wipe all existing liens off of a property, as well as getting review by both the county and the borough and making sure it fits with all of the comprehensive planning processes that are going on. We also work with people we created here in Wilkinsburg legislation with the borough and the school district to do tax forgiveness for properties that have a lot of back taxes on them. So if you can find the owner and they really don't want the property anymore, they abandoned it long ago, and they are willing to sell it for, there's not really a set amount, but say $1,000 or a nominal amount, you can then work with the borough and the school district to clean all the back taxes off and also apply for tax abatements moving forward. So that's some legislation that we've worked on here in our municipality. And then our third way of people being able to acquire properties is to work with our delinquent tax collector, who can take properties to sheriff's sale. So we can again kind of go through a process where they can apply. It still gets reviewed by local government, but we will make properties available through sheriff's sale, again at like a free and clear process, so that the taxes are cleaned off as well.
And just to add, in terms of what we've heard from other communities trying to get, that have gotten some degree of land access or property access for creative placemaking initiatives, it's correct that I would say probably the majority of these properties have come through a tax foreclosure process in our current inventory, either with the local municipality or with the local land bank authority. But there have been instances where given the placement within the neighborhood, so for example, maybe the municipality can either sell, lease, or provide temporary access to 3 of the 4 properties identified for a strategy. The 4th is privately owned. The municipality has been helpful in some instances in identifying who that property owner is and contact information, and then local practitioners have been successful in creating partnerships with privately held vacant properties. Again, typically when we've seen those instances, it's usually on a temporary basis. So I would say that while most of these are through the tax foreclosure process in some form or fashion, we have seen privately held vacant property creative placemaking initiatives as well. Those just tend to be fewer, simply because, as you can imagine, not every private property landholder is as enthusiastic about supporting a creative placemaking initiative on their property. I would also say that it's been driven, a lot of this, by public land holdings because of the ability to work with one entity for multiple properties.
Great, thank you. So we had quite a few more questions come in. One is about, what advice would you give to communities who are thinking about starting a creative placemaking initiative? And that might be kind of resources to go look at as they're thinking about these initiatives, or just general advice.
Danielle, why don't you start?
Sure, yeah. So certainly take a look at the report where we profile a couple of more initiatives. I would say frequently when we hear from a community that's interested in sort of exploring, one of their first questions is, well, what have other communities done? So we have a couple of resources on our website. In addition to our website, there are other community or creative placemaking focused entities, things like ArtsPlace, National Endowments for the Arts through their Art Town program as well, provide a number of examples of different sized communities across the U.S. So I'd say certainly look at what other communities have done, but then earlier in the process, you can engage local government officials. If you're a community-based organization or an arts practitioner, the better. And then vice versa. We've also heard from a number of city officials that really want to see more of this activity, but they're not quite sure who to engage. And I would say in that point, try to identify some arts-focused organizations that may have that network and begin engaging them, really sort of the relationship building aspect prior to trying to implement an initiative on the ground. Tracy, I'm curious what your recommendations would be.
Well, I was going to say that I'd start with really making sure that you build a social media presence for the activity or the event, or just discussing the idea of it, because that's very successful in getting engagement and building networks. Social engagement, again, you really can't get enough people involved to support something if it's in a public area, you're using it, whether it's a lot or maybe a larger area. How are people involved? I've seen really bad examples too. You know, we had sort of a largely profiled and created a large an art commission here in Wilkinsburg because of some bad examples of more, public art that didn't have a good community engagement and review and input. So the more you get people behind the project, the better it'll be. Your outcome will be. You'll always have some naysayers, and I would absolutely say that door-to-door outreach in an area where you're working, really going out and talking to people, especially if it's something that might involve closing down streets for a day or have an effect on a business or a neighborhood. Talking to everybody again and making sure they know how they're going to be affected by an event or an activity is pretty critical. But overall, you're going to have 99% people are going to love what you do, but there'll always be a couple who don't. So and I agree with the local government and working through those systems. Assume it's going to take probably 2 to 3. It's sort of like when you pack for a trip and then you put half of the clothes away. Well, do it the opposite. Assume you're going to need 2 months and then add like 4 more. It takes a lot of time to plan these types of things.
I know that's great advice on the social media. I feel like that's often forgotten, but can really be powerful in engaging the community and bringing people out that might not have otherwise known about it. So we had 2 questions that are a little bit more technical. What safeguards do you implement to prevent displacement of existing communities as new investment improves in the neighborhood?
That is a big question and could probably take up a whole nother webinar. So, I mean, in limited time, I'm not sure how far I can get, but I would say that sort of the key there is being mindful and aware and having at the forefront that unintended consequences of some of these reinvestment and revitalization actions have to be thought of and sort of planned for early on in the process. What we have found is that communities that have really been incredibly successful in some of their creative placemaking initiatives and vacant property revitalizations are aware too late in the process, if you will, of both physical displacement, but then also cultural displacement as well. So sort of at the forefront of a planning and engagement process, really trying to ask what the potential unintended consequences are and being able to put in some protections. I would say on the cultural displacement, really being incredibly diligent about engaging existing residents and the existing communities, thinking about how to engage them in a discussion of what their needs are within the community, what types of services, what types of amenities they desire for their community is hugely important. There on the sort of preservation of affordable housing and preventing displacement side, there are a whole bunch of policy interventions that can be put in place there. But I would say just in general, as a hugely important part is thinking about them early and often, even when you may be in a market where displacement seems a far way off. That is the right opportunity and moment to start thinking about it and ensuring that engagement of existing residents and existing businesses is folded in frequently and at the outset for the process.
Yeah, and I just add on from my side, Wilkinsburg is directly beside some really booming areas in the city of Pittsburgh where we have seen large-scale development and neighborhoods on the same road that we are, where the housing price was, median house price was $25,000 and it's now $250,000. So we're outside the city, we have a different tax rate, and we are exactly that community where it seems like it's not going to happen anytime soon, but we have actively worked. So when I talked about doing abatements, for instance, those you have to sign off that you will not displace current renters. We do a lot of work with our local small businesses, minority businesses right now, and are always seeking funding. It's hard to find, but if anyone's a funder out there, you can send some money our way to help keep our small businesses in place so they don't get pushed out. Same with affordable housing in a lot of these vacant properties. We'd like to have a nice mix of types of housing, but we need affordable housing. So right now, that's what we're building and helping people get. So I agree that, I know our borough council is very aware. I don't know, engagement's great, but you also need support. You need financial support. You need money. You need people above us. You can get your neighbors, the community engaged, but they still will get pushed out if they don't have some resources. So I'd say for the folks at the housing conference, let's make sure we're getting money to help support the people, not just engage them.
That's right. And so we have one more final question before we end the webinar. What are some examples of economic incentives that promote and encourage local business development?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, why don't you start, Tracy?
Okay, in Wilkinsburg, so again, it's pretty tricky, and in a community without, because we are a smaller borough, we don't have a large planning department or an urban redevelopment authority or anything along those lines. So, of course, we work with state governments for small grants, such as, facade grants and different types of Main Street programs. They're little bits of money that can help. We have created an enhanced tax abatement in Wilkinsburg, where if somebody buys a property and fixes it up, they will get 5 years without any tax increase to help get some of the money back that they've invested before they start paying an increase in taxes. Historic tax credits, of course, if you have a historic district, historic neighborhood. We just passed, Wilkinsburg is now a federal historic tax district, so that can bring in up to 20%. And then there's a few others, in some places you can do historic tax credits or new market tax credits. Those are complex deals, so you need pretty knowledgeable partners and lawyers who can help with those. And we try and just bring small grants where we can to help our businesses. We have a food grant right now. There's usually some healthy food neighborhood activities taking place across the country because most low-income communities are food deserts. So we work on different types of mini grants where we can bring, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to help small businesses expand whatever seems like the best way to help them grow.
And I would just add really quickly, if from a public property ownership standpoint, being able to do things, I had mentioned in Kalamazoo, for example, with a new business enterprise that they operated, offered a graduated rent. So being able to sort of lower the barrier for entry, either from a rent standpoint or being able to offer a lower consideration if you're going to sell the property, being able to do some of the upfront improvements. So white boxing properties prior to lease, being creative basically and looking at if you want to try and attract especially small and new businesses and new entrepreneurs, how to minimize some of their upfront physical costs to get into the space and to operate the space for the first couple of years. And Tracy had talked about some of the tax abatement strategies as well, but looking creatively at what you can do in terms of property disposition and leasing.
Well, those are great pieces of advice, and I think for both of those last two questions, you're right, Danielle, that we could have done 2 separate webinars on both of those. But we'll keep them in mind for future webinars. But with that, we're going to go ahead and close out today's webinar. And I just want to thank all of our attendees for joining the webinar and remind everyone that this webinar was recorded. And so we'll be sending the slides and the recording of the webinar out within a day or two to all of the registered attendees. And my final note is that I just want to thank our panelists so much for their great work and for presenting on today's webinar. So thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all.